Hello everyone, my name is Rick Custer. Some of you may know me as the person behind the lens of the Houston Metal Project, which is an ongoing photography project dedicated to documenting the underground heavy metal scene in Houston, Texas. And if you don't know me, I hope that introduction at least piques your interest in what you're about to watch. Every year leading up to New Year's Eve, I always see a lot of videos from YouTube creators that discuss their picks for the top heavy metal albums of the previous calendar year. I also see this from many of my musician friends on their own social media posts. What makes 2022 interesting is that the number of posts and videos seemingly dwarfs those of the previous years. That's even when you account for the lack of releases over the past 2 years due to pandemic-related lockdowns. Now, as for me, I'm not a musician, and, well, my musical education was the minimum required to get through the state of New York public education system. Needless to say, I don't know very much about the more technical aspects of music. My listening experience is pretty much limited to the visceral reaction that music provides. Now, I may not be a musician, but I am a visual artist. I learned from an early age that the visual is just as important as the oral when it comes to the experience of music. I remember being about 9 years old over at my neighbor's house and thumbing through their vinyl collection. I stumbled upon what would be, at least in my memory, the first heavy metal cover, or the first heavy metal album cover I had ever experienced, which was Black Sabbath's Sabbath Bloody Sabbath album. I remember being fascinated by it and wondering how it was created. That cover definitely caught my attention, and I asked my neighbor if I could listen to it. Unfortunately, she told me that this wasn't music for kids. Oh well, life went on. Now, going along with that, I've heard many stories from many of my friends who actually got into metal because an album cover they saw was what first grabbed their attention. And who knows, Black Sabbath could have been my own gateway band. Now, in case anyone was wondering about my visual arts education, I hold a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree in photography from the University of Houston, along with a minor in art history. I think this, along with my own artistic practice in the underground metal community in Houston, gives me a unique perspective on the visual components of these albums. About 2 weeks before the end of 2022, after scrolling through my Facebook feed, I decided I wanted to contribute. But instead of listing my favorite albums, I would list what I felt were the best album covers of 2022, which is the subject of this video. Now, aren't you glad I finally got to the point? I realize we're already several weeks into 2023, but this task proved to be much more involved than I initially thought. Just as a peek behind the curtain, it took nearly a week just to cull down from hundreds of the album covers I had to look at through this process. However, we're here now, and we're going to take a look at some art together. Before we begin with my favorites, however, let's look at some of the honorable mentions. These covers are good. Of that, there is no doubt. Each one, however, is missing some small piece I thought would put it into what I would consider great. We won't discuss these covers here, but I did want you to see them. Let's take a look. Okay, so how did you like those? I told you they were good, but now let's get into the ones I consider the best of the year. Before we begin, however, let's go over what to expect. You'll see the cover itself, the name of the band, the album title, and where known, the name of the artist who created the cover. The discussions, although relatively brief, will touch on things that make the piece great for me, be it the technical nature, the questions the art makes me ask, the references the piece makes, among other things. I've had no communications with any of the artists, so these discussions are all my own insight. A quick disclaimer, I don't own all of these albums, and there are several that I have yet to sample musically. The discussion will only be about the particular visual component of the album. This also explains why I may not have the artist information on hand at the time of this video's production. Also, this list is in alphabetical order. There is no ranking system, so please don't go reading anything into the order in which these are presented. There is one topic that needs quick discussion before we start looking at the art, as it's really started to gain traction among artists and even some non-artists. The topic, of course, is the rise of AI-generated art. I don't want to turn this video into a treatise on AI art, so I will just give my conclusion. AI art is here, and it is something with which we are going to have to live. We can either roll over and give up, or we can appropriate it to our own ends and use it as a tool to further our own works. Just to be clear, I'm not dismissing the ethical questions surrounding AI art, but I do believe some arguments in favor of its, for lack of a better term, destruction are disingenuous at best. I bring this up because there is one cover on this list that I know began life as an AI-generated piece, but was finished by a human artist. Speaking of which, I think it's about time we actually looked at the album covers. So, without any further ado, here are my picks for the best album covers of 2022. First up, we have the band 16 with their latest album, Into Dust, and the artist's name is Marold van Hasteren. Okay, where do I begin here? This artist definitely went into overdrive with some of the iconography contained within this piece. The main element, of course, is the moth. In art, moths and butterflies are often icons of transformation, with this form being the final form before death. Moths also, to a lesser extent, bring thoughts on how delicate life really is. When a moth is touched, it can often no longer fly because the dust has been knocked from its wings. The passage of time, shown by the presence of the hourglass, in turn speaks to the inevitability of death. The three color fields, at least in my reading, represent the three components of life: body, mind, and the spirit. Now, overall, the cover itself is fairly didactic in its meaning, but it's very well composed, and Van Hasteren is clearly a master at his craft. Next up, we have an album from Italian black metalers A Pale December. The album is entitled Death Panacea, and the cover was created by Sazo Toza. Now, I can remember as a child my mother having this huge Bible, and one of the things that made this Bible different from all the others was the presence of picture pages in both the Old and New Testament sections. Many of these pictures were Renaissance paintings of different scenes in the Christian stories. One of the ones that captured my imagination as a kid was the Peter Paul Rubens painting of Michael casting the morning star out of heaven. This album captures my imagination in much the same way, despite the style being very much different. Renaissance and later paintings often strove to be as detailed as possible. This painting by Toza seems to be more influenced by Impressionist painting style, as is evidenced with the heavy and very visible brushstrokes. The lack of detail is also replaced by stand-ins: a generic male figure representing the fallen angel, red representing the grounds of the pit, which itself is represented by the darker shapes enveloping the sky. Finally, we have the white paint daubs, which could be representing the angels in heaven who are watching this fall. The only thing that leaves me scratching my head is the blood that appears to be falling upward. Perhaps I need to ask the artist what this represents. Now, as one who has personally explored the quote-unquote fall in the past, these works always grab my attention. Up next, we have Angel Blast with A Throne of Ashes. This cover was created by Juanjo Castellano Rosado. This particular cover is done in the classic black and white pen and ink style that marked a lot of early underground black and death metal releases. In the past decade or so, many artists seem to be trying to move away from this style, and it is refreshing to see it used to such an effective degree on a brand new album. There are two things that caught my eye with this particular cover. The first is the composition, which itself is very formal. The band logo and album title are in the left third of the frame, and the image itself is in the right two-thirds. The image itself is the other element that caught my eye. It is highly detailed, and the frame splits it right down the middle. The level of detail is what makes me want to see the whole composition. In the tradition of album covers grabbing a viewer's attention, this one makes me want to buy the album just on the off chance I will see the rest of the image. I haven't purchased it yet, but it will soon be on my Amazon wishlist. Next up is the latest from Belphegor, entitled The Devils. The artist who created this cover is Seth Ciro Anton. Now what we have here is a highly detailed image of Christ on the cross with demons all around him. Now this makes me wonder why these demons are swarming around the crucifix. Are they celebrating? Or are they trying to prevent his death and forestall the prophecies? Is that the big bad morning star himself behind the crucifix, blocking the light of heaven from reaching the body of Christ? One thing the artist does want us to know is that this event caused chaos among the residents of hell, which can be seen with the crocodiles running along the ground. And in case you were wondering, the Christian Bible saw crocodiles as the embodiment of chaos. On a technical level, the detail in chiaroscuro are, in my opinion, amazing. I would be curious to know what medium Anton used to create this work. Next up, we have Blind Guardian with the God Machine, and the cover artist is Peter Moorbacher. This cover is the one that provoked the biggest visceral reaction in me. Humans can see more colors than just about every other animal out there, and our brains often see color before we see the detail of what's in front of our eyes. And red is one of those colors that sets off alarm bells in our brains, as it often alerts us to danger. Red symbolizes other things as well: death, violence, blood, and energy being chief among them. In this album cover, the red covers all those things. The white warrior is fresh from the kill and is searching for his next target. The red could be both the blood of his victims and the mark of the violence he inflicted upon them. The red on the floor suggests that they are being fed with blood. The warrior himself, with his robotic head and what could pass as a mechanical heart, is this god's killing machine. There is nothing really conceptual about this work, but as I stated before, the red really grabs your attention and draws you in. Dark Her offered up a brand new album in 2022 called The Buried Storm. The album cover is a black and white photograph created by Catherine Pogue. As a photographer myself, I'm a sucker for a good black and white photograph, as you probably saw in the honorable mentions, so at least one was bound to end up on this list. The first thing that stands out to me is the compressed tones of the image. There is no pure black and there is no pure white. Everything falls within a value of gray. One effect this can have on a viewer is to bring about the feelings of something being constrained. This feeling is seemingly echoed in the details of the image. We have a woman standing inside a circle, with the winds blowing her hair and dress, and the white caps on the water. All this seemingly points to a ritual being performed, perhaps a summoning of the forces of nature. The lack of bright highlights reinforces the sense of foreboding. A storm is coming. Now we have Decapitated with Cancer Culture. This album cover was created by Fabio Timpanaro. Historical painters and their styles are often one of the first things that pops into my mind when looking at a painting, and this one is no exception. Truth be told, I don't know if this is a painting or not, but I still thought of Caravaggio upon the first viewing of this. Then, for some reason, I thought of The Anatomy Lesson of Dr. Tulp by Rembrandt. This painting style, along with the viscera associated with both this piece and that of Rembrandt, very much go along with each other. What drives the association with Caravaggio, however, is his piece Salome with the head of John the Baptist. The rich reds and the tilt of the subject's head almost makes the pieces echo each other, despite the widely differing details. When considering this piece of art on its own, it really has the feel of a formal portrait. The macabre nature of this portrait ties in well with the album title, and that what we're about to hear are topics not only related to, but are different from cancer, and somehow, I think they're going to go beyond cancer in the clinical sense. Up next, we have Desecrate The Faith with their brand new album, 3. As you can probably guess, this is the album cover I mentioned earlier that started life as an AI output, but was finished by Mike Wyatt. Now, if I had to guess at which app was used to generate this, I would probably go with Disco Diffusion, simply because it seems to excel at more abstract work while being horrible with human features. Often faces will be greatly distorted and hands will have 7 or more fingers on each. This is one area where a human hand is necessary and can improve upon the work. I would also love to know what text prompts were used to generate the base image, but I digress. Going back to the conversation about red, here it is most definitely a representation of death. We have this very macabre scene in front of us. and the presence of viscera and tissue everywhere really seems to distill what brutal death metal is all about, exploring the most disgusting things, both real and metaphoric, that exist in our world. The blood and guts fill the inside of this religious building, going all the way through the nave back to the apse. This brings up a couple of different questions. Is religion being regarded as the human desire to resolve death? Or is this particular religion responsible for all this death? The lack of identifiable features on the red forms may put one off to regarding these as random red forms. Religion, however, is a uniquely human activity, and its presence here pretty much shuts down that argument. Okay, up next we have Edge of Forever with Seminole. The artist's name is Stan W. Decker. Now in the West, just as we read words, we tend to read images that lack leading lines from left to right. It is also how we establish time progression. So why is it we see dust forming back into bone and flesh in this image? In a normal world, the reverse happens. And if you remember our discussion about Into Dust by 16, well, you get where I'm going with this. Now, given the sins of the United States regarding its treatment of the indigenous tribes in North America, one is left wondering if this foretells a resurrection of the tribes to their former glory. Of course, we should also ask if this is an accurate representation of the Seminole, or if this acts as more of a generic stand-in. Either way, the reversal of time superimposed over one whose people face genocide makes this particular work of art a powerful statement, given the cultural trends of the United States in the early 2020s. The latest from Evergrey is entitled A Heartless Portrait, The Orphean Testament. I messaged the band to inquire on the artist and they responded with the name Remedy Art Design. I found that this name is the nom de guerre of a singular artist, one who has an impressive album cover portfolio. Now this is another work that made me think of a historical painting right off the bat. The example here being Saturn Devouring His Sun by Francisco Goya. Now, I get the details on this work are way off from Goya's, but let me explain. First off, given the album title refers to the Greek poet Orpheus, I'm going to use the Greek mythology names. This painting seems almost the next part of the story. We all know how Zeus defeated Kronos to become the new king of the gods. This painting gives the impression of Zeus, the human figure with the halo, forcing Kronos into Tartarus. Never mind that this painting is set in outer space. Tartarus is a primordial location in the universe, so it stands to reason that this would take place far away from our earthly realm. Truth be told, this particular piece is a real challenge for me to pick apart. There is so much more I could discuss, but in the interest of time I can really only discuss one part of the mythology. This is definitely one where I may just go ahead and ask the artist directly. He Is Legend released a brand new album called Endless Hallway. Unfortunately, I was not able to find the name of the artist by the time I made this video. Now, before we get into why this album cover is on the list, let's talk about the concept of liminal spaces. In the interest of time, we can dispense with the background information on liminality and go straight to modern culture. Liminal spaces often convey a sense of nostalgia, of being lost, and/or uncertainty. This is readily apparent in photography, especially those inside decaying structures. In internet culture, the concept of liminal spaces becomes much more sinister. A person can get trapped in the voids of these liminal spaces and be forever lost. Often the images that go along with this creepypasta are that of hallways with harsh fluorescent lights and yellowed carpets and walls. There are doorways that lead to rooms with the same features, with more doors that lead to more hallways. Okay, Rick, what does this have to do with the album cover? Well, I'll tell you. By extension, a liminal space is nothing more than a void. Here we have the frame of a hallway that leads from one section of the void to another section of the void. We could always ask if voids have sections, but that would probably need to be its own video. The genius in this particular album cover is how it distills the artistic and creepypasta concept of liminal spaces to its fundamental meaning and lays it down visually. The beauty is in the simplicity. Okay, up next we have Lorna Shore with Pain Remains, and unfortunately, another unknown artist. This one is also a black and white photograph. A good photograph, according to art historian John Sarkowski, addresses one or more of 5 different concepts. the thing itself, the detail, the frame, time, and the vantage point. This photograph deals with 4 of those 5 concepts. The thing itself and the detail both have to do with the fact that a photograph is an index. That means that this photograph can only exist because something else existed. Think of a footprint. It could only have been made if an animal had trod upon that particular spot. We know that there, at some point, existed a person with a knife to their throat, and this fact is the thing itself. The detail deals with the questions that arise as to why there is a knife to the throat. The frame here doesn't reveal the owner of the hand holding the knife, which harkens back to the detail. Is this a suicide or a homicide? Finally, we have the vantage point. We are up close and personal with the subject, closer than many are normally allowed to get to others. One other interesting thing about this image is the chemical stain on the upper left edge of the frame. This may not reveal any clues to the questions posed above regarding the thing itself, or the detail for that matter, but it does suggest some of the lyrical content contained within the album. Okay, up next we have, and I hope I'm saying this correctly, Slayict with Goddess. The artist who created this cover is David Glomba. Now the work itself is very reminiscent of old Byzantine art. We have yellow and gold backgrounds, a divine figure with an expressionless face and eyes, textual elements, and a memento mori, or remember death element. One thing that is really interesting here is how the artist appropriated a style where most of the surviving art is almost exclusively Christian in nature and made it pagan. Now, let's get into some of the details. The female figure is many things. She is divine, as denoted by the halo, a ruler, shown by wearing blue and sitting on a throne, a warrior, as denoted by the sword, a scholar, as denoted by the books, and a mother, as denoted by the egg near the bottom of the frame. The presence of the serpent and the male and female figures holding up the sun are also very much pagan in nature. A couple years ago, I started listening to a podcast discussion and learned that many pre-Abrahamic religions saw the female, the sun, and the serpent as representative of a benevolent divinity. It wasn't until the rise of the Abrahamic religions that these were replaced by the male and the eagle. In fact, we have women becoming the reason for all humankind's ills, and she was tempted by the serpent. Power structures, am I right? I never got to finish the listen. I may have to dig way back into my YouTube history and finish that podcast. The final question to be asked: is this woman meant to be the divine mother of Christ? We never hear about it in our Bible readings, and we only hear of Mary, but she is just the earthly mother of Christ. This is definitely another question I would need to address with the artist. This next cover is probably the most fun of all the album covers we've seen today. This is by Trollfest, and the name of the album is Flamingo Overlord. The artist who created this cover is named Jonas Darnell. What can I say? You have to be wary of those fascist flamingos. The work itself is didactic in that regard, but there is a bit of a conceptual dig taken at one particular individual. While American flamingos are also native to other parts of North America, they are most closely associated with the state of Florida. The gold leg is a display of wealth, and the gold wreath shows the leader is the Caesar of this group. The shrimp are smiling dumbly, just along for the ride. Given that the world's most famous quote-unquote fascist currently resides in Florida, it's not hard to see where this is going. Now, I don't know much about the band's politics, and I really don't care. I just find the album cover to be fun, and it very much stands out from the crowd in 2022. Also, truth be told, I probably would love to have a print of this on my wall. It's just that fun. Last, but certainly not least, we have Erebus by Venom Prison. The cover artist is also unknown at the time of this recording. This work is another reminder of Goya, only this time it brings forth reminders of 2 works from the Black paintings, Saturn Devouring His Son and Witch's Sabbath. The element that reminds me of these paintings is the eyes of the person, is it a child, that are wide open in sheer terror. We see this in both mentioned Goya paintings. The other reminder of Goya is the heavy brushstrokes and rich tones used. I would really love to talk to this artist because I want to know what it is that has this one person in such terror. Is this person breaking a fourth wall and afraid of the viewer? Or is this a self-contained universe and the artist needs to paint the other side? This is a question I will be asking for a long time, at least until I get it answered. Something else to ponder is the album name. Erebus is one of the primordial Greek gods and is the personification of darkness. He was also the father to Thanatos, the personification of death, and the Keres, the Greek death spirits. Could that have something to do with why this person is so terrified and is lying naked among a pile of dead bodies? And does the other person covering her mouth really believe that silence will bring them mercy? And these were the album covers that I considered the best of 2022. I know this list is a little long, but as I stated earlier, I came into this late and was bound and determined to get something out. I'm already hard at work for 2023, which will hopefully be a much smaller list with much more quality discussion. So, what do you, the viewer, think of my list? Are there any with which you disagree? Were there omissions I should have considered? I would really love to know your thoughts so we can have a discussion and learn from each other. So please don't hesitate to comment below. I also intend to make much more content for this channel. The ideas are already bouncing in my head and I will be getting to work as soon as possible. In the meantime, the number one way you can show your support is to like the video and subscribe to the channel, as this tells YouTube that other people may be interested in seeing this. But only click on those if I have earned your like and your subscription. In the meantime, take a look around you and you will find art is everywhere. We'll see you again soon. Thank you very much.